Hello, today we're going to have a slight change of tack. Normally in previous videos I've done, we've talked about rifles that belong to a certain person or a burgher. Today I'm going to talk about a gentleman whose name was Percy Moore. He certainly carried many rifles. He carried a Martini-Henry, a Lee Speed, a Lee Metford, and also a Martini-Enfield, which I'm holding at the moment. Percy Moore, which you'll see on your right in this frame here, was born in South Africa in 1873 with a sense of adventure in Africa. At that stage he decided to head north to where Cecil John Rhodes was carving out new territories in Matabeleland and Mashonaland, which eventually became Rhodesia. Percy therefore headed north, and he ended up joining the British South Africa Company Police. In fact, he joined 3 different units while he was up in Rhodesia. He served in the Victoria Column, he served in the Matabeleland Relief Force, and as I said, the BSAP. Now, during his time in Rhodesia, he was involved in 2 campaigns. The first campaign was 1893, and he was awarded the British South Africa Company Medal dated 1893, and it's got Matabeleland on the reverse of the medal, which you'll see here on your right. That's the medal at the left here, British South Africa Company Medal. Later on he went to serve in the Boer War, and that is the main topic of what I want to talk about today. Basically, I'll call it the dress rehearsal, because Percy was actually involved in the Jameson Raid, which took part in late December 1895 through to January 1896. Very briefly, I'll probably need at least an hour to tell the story, and I'll try and jam it down to 10 minutes. But Cecil John Rhodes had made his fortune in the Kimberley diamond mines. He then went into Rhodesia hoping to find more gold, but of course the huge gold deposits were found in the Transvaal, or the ZAR Republic, in 1886. It was the biggest gold discovery at that stage. The gold fields in Australia, like Ballarat, were drying up, as were the gold fields in California, and men started streaming to the ZAR, or the Transvaal, by the trainload. They came in to seek their fortunes, and many did. There were tradesmen, shopkeepers, and eventually literally thousands of these Uitlanders, which the Boers call them, arrived in the Transvaal. Excuse me. Now, the Boers called them Uitlanders, which basically means a foreigner or a person from another land. The Boers had escaped the British domination in 1837 when they'd left the Cape Colony in their wagons with their flocks of sheep and their herds of cattle, and they headed north into the uncharted areas of southern Africa, which were inhabited at that stage fairly sparsely, but by African tribes, various African tribes. After many years of fighting local African tribes, the Boers established 2 republics, the Orange Free State, or Oranje Vrystaat, and the Transvaal, or Zuid-Afrikaanse Republiek, ZAR. Paul Kruger was elected the president of the ZAR, and without going through too much of that history, as I mentioned, in 1886 they'd found these huge deposits of gold. The Boers were really perturbed about this because they'd evaded the British. They had their own republics, they had their own language, they had their own religion. They could teach what they wanted to in their schools. They were mainly farmers. They liked a pastoral way of life. And here were these thousands of foreigners coming in from mainly the UK, but also Europe, and most of these people spoke English. Some of the people came from Australia and also America. What happened was Cecil John Rhodes saw this, as did other mining magnates, and they started showing a lot of interest in this little Boer Republic that previously had been a very poor country, and with the discovery of gold had very rapidly become a very rich country. Cecil Rhodes decided, together with Jameson, who was his main man in Rhodesia, Dr. Leander Starr Jameson, with the backing, I might add, of the British Foreign Secretary Joseph Chamberlain. They plotted to send in a force to Johannesburg, and together with the Uitlanders in Johannesburg, who were going to form a revolution, they would march together with Jameson onto Pretoria, to the forts and also the magazine, and overthrow Paul Kruger's government. Well, it was an insane plan from the beginning. It didn't make any sense. Jameson raised 500 soldiers. He had the Bechuanaland Mounted Police and the BSAP. They launched their invasion from a place called Pitsani on the border of the ZAR and Bechuanaland. And basically what had happened is the Uitlanders had been sending petitions to Paul Kruger saying, listen, we want to vote. We're unhappy with this, we're unhappy with that. Kruger was really worried about these people. As I said, it got to the stage where there were about 130,000 of these Uitlanders in the Transvaal, and they were rapidly getting to the stage where they were going to outnumber the burghers. Kruger realised that if he gave these people a vote, and they were mainly English-speaking people, they could get into Parliament and basically overthrow the government. As a result, Kruger raised the franchise from 5 years to 14 years. So these Uitlanders had to actually live in Johannesburg or in the ZAR for 14 years before they were allowed to get the franchise and become citizens. They were highly upset about this, and as I said, many petitions were sent to Kruger, none of which were successful, and eventually they formed the Reform Committee in Johannesburg, 5 leading men, and a petition was raised with about 20,000 signatures and sent to Queen Victoria, saying these poor Englishmen were at the mercy of these terrible old Boers. They weren't given the vote. Justifiably, they were paying very high taxes, and it was their taxes and their work that was actually making the ZAR a rich country. As a result of all these high taxes that the Uitlanders were paying, Paul Kruger's country became a very rich and wealthy country almost overnight, in a matter of a few years. What had happened is the Cecil John Rhodes had decided to send arms in to the Reform Committee in Johannesburg, and he very cleverly sent in Lee Metford rifles. They were disguised as mining equipment, sent in by train from the Cape Colony to Johannesburg, and from Rhodesia to Johannesburg. In one case, he actually had big drums with oil at the top and oil at the bottom, and you had to open the tap at the bottom and oil came out, but in the middle there was a secret compartment which hid rifles. We believe there were about 1,800 to 2,000 Lee Metford rifles or Lee Speed rifles sent to the Reform Committee, and the idea was these weapons would be given to the Uitlanders, the people who wanted to overthrow Paul Kruger's government. The Elandslaargte Jameson would come in with his 500 horsemen. It was about 500 horsemen from Pitsani on their way to Johannesburg. They'd set up special depots. There were fresh horses and food at certain points along the way. Towards the end, the Reform Committee said, listen, hang on, please do not come. Please hold fire, don't come. We are not ready. We're not ready to raise a revolution. Wait until we say so. Well, unfortunately, Jameson was an impetuous man. He just decided not to wait. He'd got a letter from the Reform Committee to say that, Jameson, please come in and help us poor people in Johannesburg who've been so badly treated by this Boer government. That paper was eventually found by the Boers, I might add. But Jameson set off from Pitsani with his 500 horsemen on the way to Johannesburg. The Reform Committee found out about this, and to their horror, they realised that Jameson was on his way to Johannesburg. Well, it didn't take the Boers long to find out about this. The security had been very bad. The information had leaked out, and within a day or so, Paul Kruger had his commandos tracing Jameson's route into Johannesburg. There was skirmishing going on, and they got to the stage where they sent a Boer officer in to see Jameson on horseback, a white flag, and he said, listen, please turn around and go back. You're invading our country. There's no provocation. We don't know why you're here, but please turn around and go back. Jameson said, no, under no circumstances. I'm on my way to Joburg. You can tell your government that. So the board turned around, went back to inform Paul Kruger, and Jameson sped on his way to Johannesburg. Well, the Boers very quickly set up an ambush for Jameson at a place called Vlakfontein or Doornkop, and a pitched battle ensued. Jameson lost 16 men killed in action, 19 wounded, and 25 were missing in action. Whether those men decided it wasn't a good idea and disappeared, or whether they were captured, I'm not sure. But the battle went on, and Jameson had 3 field pieces, 8 Maxim machine guns, and as I said, about 500 men armed with Lee Metford rifles and Lee Speeds. It got to the stage where there was no hope. Jameson had to raise the white flag. It was total humiliation, and you know, the British nation was totally disillusioned and also highly embarrassed about the situation. They took all the arms off of Jameson's men and marched them on to Pretoria. One of the guys in that Jameson Raid was this gentleman who's on your right hand side, Percy Moore, whose medals I'm talking about. They got to Pretoria, and as can be expected, Kruger and certainly many of his burghers wanted to shoot these people. They were traitors. They'd come into this country with no provocation. They'd invaded a foreign country with no no rhyme or reason. As I said, later on they managed to find a briefcase, and in this briefcase, this is the Boers, they found this letter to a guy called Lieutenant Bobby White. He was a British officer, one of quite a few British officers, by the way, including Willoughby, who'd sided with Jameson. And the letter was given to Paul Kruger, and as I'd said before, it said, "From the Reform Committee to Jameson, please come to our aid." And we're here in Johannesburg, surrounded by these Boers who are not giving us a good deal. They won't give us a vote. We really need your help. Well, once they'd seen this, Paul Kruger realised that, the plot, he knew exactly what had happened. The Reform Committee were all rounded up and put in jail. They made them hand in all their weapons. So straight away the Boer arsenal was increased by a good 500 odd rifles, brand new rifles, as well as the 8 Maxim machine guns and 3 field pieces. Kruger very cleverly decided not to make a big thing out of this. He knew that relations between the UK and the Transvaal were very, very touchy. So he decided to hand Jameson and his men over to the British government. They were sent down to Natal and put on a ship, Harlech Castle, and sent off to the UK. And as can be expected, the trial which they put Jameson through was a sham. He never served his sentence. He served a short time. All the other men were let loose and sent straight back to South Africa. So within a period of a month and a half or so, these guys were back in Rhodesia or in South Africa, and nothing had happened to them. It was only the officers and Jameson himself who were actually put on trial. As a result of the Jameson Raid, it had far-reaching effects. Within the same week, Paul Kruger got together with the Commandant General Piet Joubert, and they ordered thousands of rifles. They started ordering Martini-Henrys. They started ordering the Giddies or Gades rifle. The Boers realised that it was only a matter of time excuse me, before the British were going to invade their country. As I mentioned before, the Jameson Raid was basically a dress rehearsal. Kruger knew very well that relations were strained with the UK. What he had to do was to arm his burghers. They'd found that there were only about 40% of the burghers that did not actually have weapons. And if they did have weapons, they were all older types. So initially they ordered, as I said, Martini-Henrys and Giddies. Later on, there were a lot of new rifles out at that stage, as you may know, Mannlichers, Mausers. Paul Kruger very wisely convinced Commandant General Piet Joubert to order the Mauser, because that was the state-of-the-art rifle at that stage. Luckily for the Boers, they did order thousands of Mausers, and when Boer War did break out in October 1899, the Boers were armed with the very best rifle that money could buy in those days. They also bought a lot of artillery. They bought Krupp guns from Germany and also creosote guns from France. So a lot of this money that was being made by the Uitlanders was going into the coffers of the ZAR, and they were spending a lot of money on armaments. They also decided to build 4 forts around Pretoria, their capital, which went ahead. It turns out that our friend Percy Moore, that we're talking about today, was one of the Uitlanders. When he got back from Rhodesia, he went to live in Johannesburg. When war was brewing in late September, October 1899, most of the Uitlanders left, he included, and went down to Durban. The war broke out on the 11th of October 1899. On the very same day, Percy Moore joined the Imperial Light Horse. It was turned out to be a famous local South African regiment. 2 Victoria Crosses were won by men in that unit, and one of the first actions that took part in the Boer War was the attack on Elandslaargte. So it turns out that our friend Percy Moore was involved in the Battle of Elandslaargte, where he was wounded. He was wounded in action, taken out of the field, went on later for the relief of both Ladysmith, and went around with General French and took part in the relief of Mafeking. I have to tell you that when I was given these family medals, they actually were in this very same Queen Victoria chocolate tin, the 2 medals that you can see on your right, together with 4 of the Mafeking banknotes. So that was a wonderful present to be given from a family member. Well, I think that tells the story about the Jameson Raid and how it affected the Boer War. As I said, most certainly, if there hadn't been a Jameson Raid, there may not have been a Boer War. It was a tragedy for the world, really, and certainly for the Boers, who ended up losing their independence. The Jameson Raid was total humiliation for the British Empire. The Kaiser Wilhelm II sent a telegram to Paul Kruger congratulating him on beating these traitors, these English traitors who had invaded his country. That really upset Queen Victoria. He was the grandson. There were a lot of things happening from October, should I say, 1896, the Jameson Raid, and 1899. 3 years later, they were at war with Britain, and it went on for almost 3 long years. I hope you enjoyed the story.